Hello, Aunt May. In this presentation, I'm going to explain human-caused climate change from a scientific perspective. I will focus on what researchers actually measure and observe. I will make no statements that cannot be proven through data. I will walk through how the greenhouse effect and the carbon cycle function as two interconnected systems, how human activity has already altered those systems, and the ecological and health impacts that have already been documented regarding those changes in the systems. I'll also discuss two major technological solutions for fossil fuel use. So what is climate change? Climate change refers to long-term changes in Earth's average climate. This includes temperature, precipitation patterns, and the frequency of extreme weather events like hurricanes and tornadoes. What makes climate change incredibly important is that these changes don't occur in isolation. They affect interconnected systems, meaning that even relatively small shifts in temperature can cascade into larger impacts like ecosystem stress, water scarcity, and changes in agricultural productivity. The greenhouse effect is a natural process that helps regulate Earth's temperature and makes life possible. Solar radiation warms Earth's surface coming from the sun, and the planet then releases energy back into space as infrared radiation off of the surface of the Earth. Greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane absorb most of the outgoing heat and re-radiate it back towards Earth, helping to retain warmth in the lower atmosphere. On its own, this is a stable and necessary system. The concern arises, however, when the concentration of these gases increase tremendously, strengthening the effect beyond its natural balance. The carbon cycle describes how carbon moves continuously through Earth's atmosphere, living organisms, oceans, and geological systems. Plants absorb carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and convert it into organic compounds. That carbon then moves through food webs as organisms consume plants or other organisms. When organisms die, decomposition returns carbon to the soil and atmosphere. Think of a rabbit eating grass, and a coyote comes along, eats the rabbit, and then a cougar eats the coyote. Carbon moves from the grass to the rabbit to the coyote and then the cougar. And when the cougar dies, it'll decompose and the carbon will go back into the earth and into the air. Over long timescales, some carbon becomes stored in fossil fuels or sedimentary rock. This effectively removes it from the active carbon cycle for millions of years. Fossil fuels represent the long-term carbon reservoir I introduced in the previous slide. Over millions of years, that carbon was stored underground, but when it was extracted by humans and we burned these fuels, we released back into the atmosphere all the carbon dioxide that was stored in these fuels much faster than any natural process could remove it from the atmosphere. This strengthens the greenhouse effect and shifts Earth's energy balance greatly. These changes are tracked through direct atmosphere measurements as well as satellite and ecosystem-based monitoring. When scientists study climate change, they don't rely on a single data set. Rather, they compare multiple independent lines of evidence collected over long periods of time. One of the clearest indicators is the long-term rise in global surface temperature. This temperature has increased by about 1.1% Celsius since the late 1800s based on combined land and satellite records. Another important data set comes from the observations of ocean temperature. The oceans absorb most of the excess heat trapped in the climate system. This increase in ocean heat content is measured using networks like Argo floats, along with satellite data. Together, these measurements show a consistent warming trend throughout the global ocean. Sea level rise is another well-documented indicator of a warming planet. It is caused by both melting ice sheets and the thermal expansion of seawater as it warms. Satellite altimetry allows scientists to measure these changes globally with high precision. And the data also shows that the rate of sea level rise is increasing over time. Satellite and field observations also show widespread retreat of glaciers and significant mass loss from the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica. In addition, there is strong scientific agreement across peer-reviewed research that recent warming is primarily driven by human activity. This conclusion is based on multiple independent datasets that all point to the same overall trend. Ecological systems are already responding to these climate shifts in measurable ways. Species are shifting their ranges towards cooler environments, either toward higher latitudes or higher elevations. In some cases, these changes are happening faster than species can adapt, which disrupts food webs and reduces ecosystem stability, as noted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Coral reefs are especially vulnerable. With warming oceans leading to more frequent bleaching events, seasonal timing is also shifting, which affects migration and reproduction cycles, while ocean acidification is weakening organisms that rely on calcium-based structures. Climate change has well-documented effects on human health. One of the clearest impacts is the increase in heat-related illness. As heat waves become more frequent and intense, rates of heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and cardiovascular stress increase, especially among older adults and those who work outside. According to the World Health Organization, rising global temperatures are already contributing to higher risks of heat-related illness and mortality. Another major impact is the expansion of vector-borne diseases. As temps continue to rise, organisms like mosquitoes and ticks are now able to survive in regions that were previously too cold for them to survive in. This has contributed to the spread of diseases such as Lyme disease and West Nile virus into new areas. Beyond these two main effects, climate change also contributes to reduced food security, worsening air quality from wildfire smokes and ozone, increased water contamination risks, and mental health impacts following climate-related disasters. One of the most direct ways to reduce future warming is to transition away from fossil fuels and toward low-carbon energy systems. Solar and wind energy generate electricity with very low emissions during operation. Although these options can be limited by cost, variability, and infrastructure requirements. Hydroelectric power is another really good option that provides large-scale energy generation, but can have ecological impacts depending on how it is developed. Nuclear energy is another option, which also produces large amounts of low-carbon electricity, although it raises concerns relating to cost, safety, and long-term waste management. While each option has limitations, together they represent a major pathway for reducing greenhouse gas emissions at scale. Carbon capture technologies are designed to reduce carbon dioxide emissions or remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Direct air capture removes CO2 directly from ambient air, while carbon capture and storage prevents emissions from entering the atmosphere by capturing them in industrial sources. Bioenergy with carbon capture combines biomass energy production with carbon removal and can potentially result in net negative emissions. However, these technologies are still very limited by high costs, energy demands, and scalability challenges. For that reason, they are generally considered a supplement or complement to reductions rather than a replacement. Before this project, I mostly thought of climate change as an environmental issue. Through studying the carbon cycle and greenhouse effect, though, I developed a clear understanding of it as a biological and geophysical system driven by measurable processes. What stood out the most to me was how directly humans have influenced our environment. We have greatly altered long-term carbon storage by releasing fossil carbon into the atmosphere at a rapid rate. I also found that the observational evidence, like glaciers and shrinking ice sheets, to be particularly compelling because it reflects physical changes in some of the Earth's most stable regions. Overall, this project helped me understand how scientists use long-term independent measurements to build a consistent picture of climate change as an ongoing and measurable global process. So, Aunt May, after this presentation, I hope you've learned something. I'm going to leave you with these two questions to ponder. What type of scientific evidence would you find most convincing when evaluating claims about human-caused climate change? And then if new evidence challenged our current scientific understanding, how should scientists and us as a society respond?